Reviewing laptops is generally quite easy because the unit arrives and you'll do all your tests, you look at the design, the specifications, and make sure it just lives up to what it says it's going to do. But every now and again, a curveball comes and just completely throws everything out of whack. The curveball to which I'm referring was the ASUS TUF FX707, but the question has to be answered, was it a good or a bad curveball? We're going to stick with our normal processes, looking at the design, the performance, and so on and so forth. But every now and again, I'm going to throw in a big red question mark because it's something that I want you to note for the conclusion. Sometimes I'll talk about it at that point, but just note that these are going to pop up. Now, talking about question marks, let's move on to exclamation marks. I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video today, you. We are almost at 1 million views. Maybe by the time we release this, we will be at 1 million views. So thank you so much for your support. It's happened pretty much over the last year and we've really grown. So I'd really like to thank you for your continued support in the channel. Let's talk design firstly. The overall impression or initial impressions were pretty good. I did an overhead unboxing. So if this is something that you'd like and would like to see more of, please let me know in the comment section below, but I'll show you some of that footage now. But nothing stood out to me in a massive way, either good or bad. If you go to the ASUS website, the landing page for the FX707, it follows this mecha anime theme, which is generally quite ostentatious if you watch anything anime that is mecha. But the actual design was quite discreet. The entire composition of the outer laptop is plastic except for the lid, which is metal. One of the things that I liked about the design is the X feature at the top of the laptop, which shows you different statuses like flight mode, battery, and so on and so forth. And I think this is something that ASUS can expand on in the future to say, is turbo mode active? Is Windows power saving enabled? Those kind of things. So I think it's a really cool feature that can be expanded on. The touchpad is good, it glides nicely, and it's actually very deceivingly large, and I've got quite big hands. The keyboard is good, it's pretty standard, it's one zone RGB. If you don't know what that means, it means that it can only be one color at a time. You can't do per key, so it's not gonna have any waves or anything, i.e. one zone RGB. And it does have a numpad, so that does kind of come in if you are gonna be using it for productivity. The one thing that I found not weird, it's just something that I've seen before but I've never really noted, is the WSAD keys. They are see-through, but I looked at the laptop a few times thinking, oh crap, I've like misplaced the keys or they've come out. It's because they see through, but it's just something that you can easily identify because I guess they are the most utilized keys when it does come to gaming. The bezels are nice and thin, which is something that we've come to expect from ASUS, but this lessens the physical footprint of the laptop. 17 inches a few years ago, not the same thing as 17 inches now. And even though I knew it was a 17-inch when I got the notebook and was testing it, when you opened it, it wasn't like this huge screen opening in front of you like laptops 10 years ago. And this is a really nice effect because you're getting more screen real estate with a smaller actual device. I/O ports or input-output ports, yes, I'll talk about them in specs, but this is the design that I'm talking about. I would like to see it at the back. Obviously this is on the side, so it's a little bit subjective as to, okay, I like it here, I like it here. I prefer it at the back because if you have the power there as well as RJ45, it just creates a nice, neat, clean footprint when you're putting your laptop down. But something that I'd like to see more of in the future is making this being a standard at the back. Thermal design, unfortunately, I'm still not allowed to open the notebooks. I do hope I get to a stage where they say it's fine, you know, just open it, it's cool. But I got to see imagery of it and it looks pretty standard for what you'd expect to see in mid to high-end notebooks. Lastly, on the design, it's again not a design, it's more of a feature or a benefit. It is mill-grade spec 810G, and this just means that it's passed a test of robustness, which speaks to the quality of materials used in the design and construction of the notebook. Now that the design is done, let's jump into the specs. So there are 4 models in this range, which is the FX707 VV, VU, ZV, and ZU. I was working, or I am reviewing the VV, so the one on the far left. Starting off with the processor, it is an Intel 13th Gen Core i9, a 13900H, starts off at 2.6 and boosts to 5.4. It has 14 cores with 6 performance and 8 efficiency cores. Next is the graphics card, which is an NVIDIA RTX 4060, which has 8 gigs of GDDR6. And importantly, it does go up to 140 watts with 115 watts on standard and 25 watts on dynamic boost. It also promises a 50 megahertz overclock on the performance. But this is where I'd like to draw my first question mark. The display is a 17.3-inch Full HD, which is 1920 by 1080, standard 16 by 9, and it is an IPS level display with anti-glare. Now, I will talk about this more in the performance, but the sRGB is 62.5%, and I'm not going to go over the rest. The important note is that it is 144 Hz and it does have G-Sync. And I would like to add another question mark there. The standard memory config is 16 gigs, which is 8 gigs times 2. It's DDR4 at 3200. Just note for some of the overseas, call it variants, I have seen them in DDR5. It does support up to 32 gigs. It can actually support more. It's just more along the lines of what ASUS is comfortable to support on the actual device. Storage we'll talk about in the performance, but on this config, it's a 512 gigabytes, it's PCIe 4, and it's an M.2 interface. IO port's pretty straightforward and actually quite good value here. It does have a 3.5 combo audio jack. It has one HDMI, which is at 2.1. It does have two USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A's and one USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C, which does support display ports as well as power delivery and a G-Sync. There is an RJ45 LAN port, and there is one Thunderbolt 4, which supports display out. Quickly touching on the networking and communication, it is Wi-Fi 6 and it's dual channel and has Bluetooth 5.2. Importantly, the weight is 2.6, so not too heavy, and the dimensions are 39.4 by 26.4 by 2.54, and that's obviously when the laptop is closed. So the specs left me with more questions than answers. Some of the componentry is super high-end, i9, and some of it's super low end, like the monitor. Now we also have a, call it complication, in which we have the highest end CPU in an i9, but then a 4060, which kind of doesn't make sense when you're trying to tie up for a gaming notebook, which I'll speak about in performance and in the conclusion, but some of this is subjective. But the main question I was asking myself is, who is this for? So in order to answer some of those questions, let's dive into the performance. Okay, on to performance. Now we've gone over the specs, so let's give you the settings of the PC. All drivers up to date up to the 15th of December 2024, and all tests were done in turbo mode because it's the max or the highest efficiency that you'll get. The fans are also set to turbo on system profile, so they would be at max. So this is obviously for when you get to cooling, and the Windows version was 23H2. Starting off with Cinebench, we've ordered this in lowest to highest, and what we've done is we've added another metric to our testing. So we do average as well as best. Now looking at multi-core performance, the average that we got was 18,736 versus a sample of 18,750. So pretty much bang on. Then the best, which is basically just doing one run of Cinebench. So what we do is on average, for the averaging, we'll run 3 10-minute tests, and for the best, we'll do the best of 3. So we got a 19,222 there. So this is just to show that the laptop is able to get the performance out of the CPU, which it definitely does over here. Single core performance also in lowest to highest, we got a score of 2033, which is actually higher than the sample of 2016. But the highest as well as the average was pretty much neck and neck. It was the same thing. So good score coming out of single core performance as well. Next, Geekbench, same as Cinebench, we had a score of 12,645, which is slightly lower than the sample average of 12,706. So not too much to note there. Single core performance showing something a little bit different. We got a score of 2,739, which kind of mirrors the, call it, over performance that we saw in Cinebench, which is better than the 2,617 from the sample. So really good single core performance coming out of this notebook, mirrored across two of the testings. Now to note another, call it, question mark, we had a great CPU performance, but when we came to the SSD, it wasn't as great. We had a read of 4,304 and a write of 1,838 on peak performance on Crystal Disk, and on real world 2,109 versus a write of 1,650. If we look at the IOPS, or input output operations per second, we had on peak performance 112 versus a write of 126. This is in thousands, and real world 15,000 versus 40,000. So again, high-end CPU, but then a, call it, lower-end SSD. But when looking into the SSD, I actually find it's the Micron 2400, which is 176-layer QLC. So very good quality SSD, but the results not great. It does promise 4,200 on read and 1,800 on write, so it did perform to what it's meant to, but again, it's just not really high in comparison with the massive result that we got from the CPU. Also, not really happy about the life cycle of this SSD at 150 terabytes, but I guess it can be said to be standard. Moving over to performance test 10, it's actually now performance test 11, but I still have the results from the two older ones that I did on my desktop, as well as the ROG SCAR 18, which was the 13980HX with the 4090 and 32 gigs. So a score coming out of 9,826, which is not too bad against the SCAR, but I do need to check that these results actually measure the same. So what I've done is I've taken the actual individual results and I'll be able to compare those at future dates for the CPU, 2D graphics, 3D graphics, memory, as well as disk. PC Mark boasting a score of 7,685. Now, this is not bad comparatively if we look at the SCAR 18, which obviously does have a huge score at basically 9,000. But if we look at its brother and sister, the TUF outdid the M16, which is obviously an 11800H with a 3070, but didn't do as well as the 12900H with 3070 Ti of the ROG G733Z. So just something to note, as we'll start to see a pattern on this as we go into the other performance figures. Moving on to 3D Mark CPU profile. Now, if you don't know what this is, it actually tests the thread performance. So you can't really compare the top and the bottom, but what I do is I take the bottom, which is testing one thread, and the top, which is testing all threads. So if a CPU has more threads, it naturally has an advantage. And we can see that from the SCAR 18, the 13980HX does have more threads, so its top is going to be a lot higher than the 13900H, which has less threads. But what we can see is a really good single thread performance of 1117 versus the score of 1174 on the 13980HX. Again, as we have more comparative data, we will be able to draw more comparisons, but this is a good indication of performance on the CPU. 3D Mark storage benchmark mirroring what we found in Crystal Disk Mark with a low score of 1775. Now, I do see that the ROG Strix SCAR 18 is at 1628, but we did note this when we did the review, and that's because it was a different RAID configuration and I didn't want to separate the RAID. So I just keep that there because it is an actual result that we got. But if we look at the ROG G733Z, we see a much higher score of 3381, and that was using a high-end Samsung. So again, the performance on the SSD not that great. Moving on to results that matter from a gaming perspective, 3D Mark Time Spy, we got a score of 10,944. Now, if you look right next to that on the right, the ROG G733Z, which has a previous generation CPU and a previous generation GPU, yes, it has a higher generation GPU, but that had a score of 11,750. So this kind of mirrors the whole thought in, is there a mismatch between the CPU and the GPU? Moving on to the gaming benchmarks, the render resolution was in 1080p for all because that's a native of the screen, and all settings were set to ultra so that we have a good comparative. Starting off with Formula 1, we had minimums of 106, averages of 134, and a max of 156. Rainbow Six Siege, the minimums of 222, the averages of 323, and the max of 377. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the minimums of 95, average of 110, and the max of 126. And lastly, Far Cry 6, the minimums of 71, average of 102, and the max of 187. Now onto the temperatures, the clock speeds, and the wattage pools. Starting off with the benchmarking max temperatures, what I did was I put the system idle on the far left just to show you what the general system idle for the CPU was, which is 54. The GPU is nothing because it's integrated, so we're not going to have any temperatures coming out of a GPU that is quote unquote off. But looking at 3D Mark Time Spy, we hit a max on the CPU of 103, and on the GPU we hit 76. For 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme, we hit a max of 103 on the CPU and the GPU 78. For Cinebench R23, we hit a max on the CPU of 99, and the GPU decided it wanted to come on, but it did stay low at 46. Same thing on ASUS 64 Stress, we hit a max of 99, and also the GPU poking its head out, it hit a max of 55. Again, I need to put these numbers in because they are the accurate numbers, but the GPUs matter not much on the R23 and ASUS 64 result. Gaming temperatures, I don't want to linger on too much, but there is a commonality in the average CPU and max CPU being quite high. The T-junction for the CPU is 100 degrees, and obviously we see that on 3 benchmarks we hit over 100 degrees. But this is a common theme in laptops because of its small form factor. Yes, I do think that these temperatures are slightly on the high side, maybe a little bit concerning on the high side, but when doing normal operating work, it was fine. And again, my settings were set to pretty much the high settings that you can get, so you can scale them. The GPU, however, did extremely well, sitting between 66 and 74 on average, and the max being between 73 and 77. Lastly, let's look at CPU package power and GPU power. This is the wattage pull. For 3D Mark on the CPU, we hit 89, and for the GPU, we hit 118. For 3D Mark times by extreme, we hit 99 on the CPU and 123 on the GPU. For Cinebench R23, we hit a max of 110 on the CPU, and the GPU doesn't really matter, but 20. ASUS CPU pulling 97 watts and 19 on the GPU, again, doesn't really matter. And then lastly, just have the system idle average, which was 7 watts on the CPU and nothing on the GPU. However, it does fluctuate quite a bit. The monitor, only a few things that I want to point out because ASUS actually underpromised and over-delivered in one or two regards. For example, ASUS says that the sRGB is 62.5%, but I got a result of 66% when testing with my data color device. Not too bad on the luminescence uniformity, but we did have slightly varying results at the top of the monitor versus the bottom, with about a 6 to 7% delta. The overall rating from data color was 4, which is not too bad, but honestly, when looking at the monitor for the first time, I actually found it to be a really good experience. I was questioning in my head whether it was 1440p or 1080. It was really early in the morning, so maybe I was still waking up, but it is a really good quality monitor despite the fact that the color accuracy is not that great. Looking at other measures, starting off with the sound, it does have Dolby Atmos and high res, but I found the sound to be clear but lacking a bit of soul. So it will serve the purpose of speakers, but it's not very loud, and it's not very, I use the word too much, oomphy. The camera was never gonna blow any expectations away at 720p, but it was very basic and very grainy, and I'll show you a little video of me testing it.
Okay, so camera test one. Doesn't look too bad like this. So if you're planning to use it for any other purpose except like conference calls, it's okay. I do have a light, I've had to put that on, which is creating a little bit of grain in the image. You can see there's like grain everywhere. But as soon as we do anything else to explode it, it becomes horrendous, unfortunately. At the same time, we're testing out the microphone as well. So let's see how the microphone goes, and I'll test that on audio software once I've actually captured it and see what the wave patterns do. And then I'll be able to give my opinion on what I felt the microphone and the all around. But camera not so good. It's a 720p camera, and I would assume like a 0.9, 0.7 megapixel. Not that megapixel matters. I mean, this thing is so thin at the bottom, it's all about the CMOS sense of it anyway. Off we go.
The mic, as you would have seen or rather heard from the camera clip, is pretty good. Now, I don't know if this is software and the AI noise cancellation, but this room isn't fully treated yet, but there was no reverb and it was quite crisp and clear. So I was really impressed with the microphone's performance. Onto fan noise, something that I'm always asked about. It is loud, it's a gaming laptop, it's small fans with lots of blades, so it is going to output a lot of noise. It's not screechy, whiny noise. This one's actually very huffy and there is no coil whine. Probably the most important spec in this laptop, the weirdest one, the battery, 90 watt hours. This battery lasts forever. When I was watching movies, and I'm talking about not changing a single setting, and I was streaming, so using the internet and streaming, I literally watched Fish. Well, I didn't watch it, I just put it there to obviously measure, but it was fish in the ocean with sound playing. The screen was at 100% and the sound was at 50%, and it went for 8 hours and 32 minutes. So massively long, and if you put on battery saving, lower the brightness and lower the actual audio, you're going to get a lot more out of it. For example, if you're wearing a headset, you may get 12 hours if you're on 50% on the actual screen brightness. I really don't like reporting on how well a laptop does on battery while gaming, but because of how well the battery did, I did this time. Formula 1 2021, and on settings of medium, I got about an hour and 32 minutes just running a constant simulation. So you can game on this, and it was actually really good. The graphics were good and the experience was good while watching it. I was just benchmarking it at the time. So you are able to game on the battery on this notebook. So overall, the performance is really good, but it was leaning very much towards the productivity side and less in the gaming side. So we're setting up for a very interesting conclusion. We are going to move on to the conclusion now, but it's very important that you listen to the whole conclusion because it all kind of comes together in the end. The first point is I think we have an imbalance in the CPU versus the GPU. Now, gaming focuses on single core performance and the i9 is the best frequency in the range. So yes, you are going to get the best performance out of a game. However, if we had something that had less cores and wasn't operating as much in the back, something like an i7 or an i5, I think that we might have actually got a bit of a better gaming performance because we weren't trying to balance the temperatures too much in the CPU. This is all obviously hypothetical, but I do think that there was too much disparity between the CPU and the GPU. The next is G-Sync. While it's a cool feature, G-Sync generally increases the cost of a monitor or a laptop. Now that cost could have been used better somewhere else, but you're going to have to set your settings to lower in order to get to the full 144 Hz for G-Sync to actually really start to make sense. Now this is going to make sense in few applications like maybe CSGO, where you're going to get a high refresh rate as well. Well, not a high refresh rate, a high frame rate that the refresh rate is going to complement, and the same thing in Rainbow Six Siege. So G-Sync, while some might argue, I don't think was a necessary inclusion in this laptop. One of the conclusions that I was playing with is that this is really good for things like Photoshop because of the CPU, but then the color accuracy of the screen kind of killed that idea. As it is now, I'd say the best beneficiary or the best person for this notebook is a hybrid user, someone that is going to use it at work or at home, especially because of that battery life, where you need high productivity at work, Excel, etc., multiple applications, and then you want to go home and you want to be able to play a game and you're not that serious about the settings in your game. I think that's the user that's going to benefit most behind this laptop. So if I could redesign this laptop, I would take it from an i9 to an i5, maybe an i7. I'd swap out the 4060 for a 4070. I'd change the screen or the monitor to a 1440p and possibly take out the G-Sync. At 30,000 Rand, with its nearest competitors being around about 45,000 Rand for same or similar spec, maybe one or two variants, the value for money is insane. So if you need a laptop that has massive productivity potential as well as the ability to game at a good price, this does get a massive check mark. I'd like to thank ASUS for sending me the most confusing laptop to review, or the most confusing laptop that I've reviewed so far. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Any questions, as you know, put them in the comment section below and I'll try and get to them as soon as I can. Cheers. Goodbye.